Oh, cool. When we talk about geoengineering, there are two broad.
That was a short clip from the Innovation Agora of CERAweek. CERAweek, an annual energy conference held in Houston that attracts some of the biggest figures in energy production, is one of the largest gatherings of oil and gas companies in the world and provides insights into how the clean energy transition is or isn't going. Today we have two stories on energy futures. First, we'll dive into this year's CERAweek, and then we have a discussion focused on a new project that aims to use public art to generate clean electricity in cities around the world. I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor in Rice University's Environmental Studies program and the program manager of the Diluvial Houston Initiative, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. First today, we're joined by Chris Tomlinson, business columnist at the Houston Chronicle, who is here to walk us through this year's CERAweek conference. Chris Tomlinson, welcome to the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So just to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about first, what is CERAweek, and two, why have you been covering it for the last decade?
So, CERAweek is arguably one of the most important conferences for the energy industry, particularly the oil and gas industry. It's been going on for over 40 years now. And the main event is the opportunity to hear the CEOs of the world's largest oil companies talk about what their plans are for the future. The last few years, there's been a bit of a sideshow called Agora, where we learn about innovative clean energy technology and climate technology. But for the most part, it's still all about hearing what the big boys in the traditional energy sector have planned for the years ahead.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that and that clarifying understanding of what it is. And I mean, you mentioned the energy sector. It's also just like a kind of insane guest list in general. Bill Gates was there this year. The CEOs of Exxon, Shell, Aramco, who are usually there, but also government officials. John Podesta, who is the senior advisor to the president on clean energy. Jennifer Granholm, U.S. Secretary of Energy. So I mean, it's focused on a business community, on the energy community, but also brings together these policymakers to some extent to talk about what's going on, right?
That's the draw, is an opportunity for these people to all be in the same city at the same time and have side meetings. The joke about CERAWeek is that if you attend and you never go to a panel and you spend all your time in side meetings, you're where the real action is. It's not so much what's going on the big stages as much as the backroom meetings where people get to know each other and people can have those difficult conversations. Like I'm sure Secretary Granholm spoke to a couple of top CEOs the day that she was here.
Yeah, her reception was a little chilly. I mean, there were places where I think folks were interested, but there was also yeah, a lot of reluctance, especially around areas like liquefied natural gas, which the Biden administration has recently put a major pause on, much to the chagrin of many of those in the oil and gas industry, but with major environmental benefits.
That chilliness, and I would call outright hostility towards Secretary Granholm was, orchestrated. It was performative. These people intentionally sat on their hands to the point that, the secretary had to say, come on, you can clap for that. That's good news for you. And then they would reluctantly put their hands together. But the problem is, this is still an industry that is a decade behind the rest of the world in its understanding of what is necessary to fight climate change. And people like Secretary Granholm and President Biden are forcing them to give up their cheese, if you will. They're giving up their big money maker, and they don't like it.
No, and I so appreciate you bringing that up. My experience at the conference, and you've written on this as well. But I think the big takeaway for a lot of folks was Saudi Aramco's CEOs, Amin Nasser's. comment that we should quote we should abandon the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas and instead invest in them adequately reflecting realistic demand assumptions. And basically every panel and conversation I went to was some paraphrasing of that, that came into conversation constantly. And admittedly I was around really the climate space of the conference, but hearing people take that to heart in a way that I felt was disheartening and a little frightening, person after person kind of saying, yeah, we're just going to drill till every dollar of oil and gas has been taken out. And so we need to just magically find solutions that don't exist to fix this problem other ways, was a little frightening. And I'm curious what your read of that was, and certainly your read of kind of the officials who were speaking.
Well, let's not forget that the CERA in CERAweek stands for uh, Cambridge Energy Research Associates. And they are owned by one of the world's largest consulting firms, S&P Global.
Yeah.
Uh, Everyone that's appearing on that stage is a client. They are paying to be on that stage. They have already run these speeches through the CERA machine, and the consultants have helped them craft these messages. And that's why you have such a concerted and coherent messaging from everyone. I mean, Nasser from Aramco is a perfectly predictable villain. I know that on Monday morning of CERAweek, he is going to say something outrageous that I can build an entire column around. He is the heavy, and he can get away with it because he works for a murderous dictator who is in charge of Saudi Arabia. Um, and if you're the CEO of a publicly held company like Exxon or Chevron, you can't be that blatant about your complete disregard for what happened at COP28 or the Paris Agreement or all the other climate agreements that more than 180 countries have agreed to. Um, but you've got to know that the sympathies are with Nasser and Aramco. And if you follow the industry, all of those lines have a subtle meaning that are a jab at someone elsewhere in the world. And we can dig into that if you'd like, but there was a lot there that was very specific, um, and things that OPEC in general and Saudi Arabia in particular are very angry about.
Sure, and I would love for you to say a bit more about that, both what people are upset about, in that space, but also, I think it's really important. And in reading your column, and if folks haven't read your column in the Houston Chronicle this week, go read it. It's wonderful. It's really thoughtful. But this larger point about certainly Nasser can come out and yes, make that stronger, bolder claim as you're saying, but you do a really great job of mapping out where other people are saying similar things, and you make the explicit point that this is a week to test messaging and to bring out those oil industry front, and noting, I believe, Exxon CEO Darren Woods, who gave an interview recently where, coming out with comments about the idea that carbon neutrality by 2050 is never going to happen. And so, I mean, different versions of this from kind of across the field. So I would love to know more about your read of, yes, what is this message that we're hearing? And yeah, I mean, is it cutting through? Because where I'm sitting, it's really frightening to hear the leaders of the energy sector really just kind of using language that, exactly as you said, feels 10 years out of date, at least.
The biggest problem facing the energy industry today, both the national and the international oil companies, is financing. It's becoming more difficult to come by. The value of the stock of these companies, Aramco is a publicly listed company now. It's listed on a Saudi exchange, but you can go buy shares in Aramco tomorrow if you want to. All of these stock prices are depressed compared to past years. Um, and part of that is that their cost of capital is much higher. Everything they do is much more expensive, and they are trying to compete against alternative energy forms where the costs and prices are dropping dramatically. We are not far from electric vehicles being on price parity with internal combustion engines. And as someone who owns one of each, I can tell you, once you've bought an EV, you don't really ever want to buy anything else. It's just that much better and cheaper and more economical over the long run. So, you know, when he says we need to invest in oil and gas, he is sending a message to investors saying, we're still relevant, we'll still make you money. Please give us your investment so that we can drill for more oil and gas, make more profits, and make you wealthy. When he complains about a fantasy, he's directly attacking the International Energy Agency,
Mm.
which has forecasted that demand for crude oil will peak in this decade. And that is in direct contradiction to OPEC's forecast, which sees the demand for crude oil rising through 2040.
Mm.
And if your country, if your nation, if your government relies on crude oil for 75% of your revenue to pay for everything else in your country, staring down a plateauing, um, plateauing demand level for your commodity is potentially disastrous and ruinous. So, you know, this is where Nasser's not alone. I mean, this is where we go to Exxon's comments about saying, oh, well, you guys blew it. We're not going to be able to get to net zero. So you have to buy our oil and gas and you need to invest in us. Um, when he turns around and says, oh, we can make cheaper, I'm sorry, we can make more climate friendly fuels, but the public's not willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And when he says, oh, well, if we raise the price of fuel by making it cleaner, you're going to make all these brown babies in Africa and Asia suffer because they're never going to have the energy they need. This is all ways of saying you need us, you need our demand, and if the world needs us, we are a safe bet for investors to put more money into our corporations.
Mm.
This is ultimately a business, and no oil and gas company has figured out how to transition into another sector of the energy business that's going to generate as higher returns as oil and gas does.
I mean, thank you for that. And that's something that I really felt in my time at the conference was a complete lack of attention to reduction. And even from folks who I think were really, kind of focused on, oh, we need stopgap measures to get us to these magical clean technologies. And so this has to continue, and hearing things that I found frightening. One of the things that I realized was in some of the numbers they were throwing out about, oh, they're going to, climate activists are going to want $10 billion a year for this. And it's like, you have no sense of the scale of what this like $10 billion is not even a tenth of what people would be asking for, and not just as a move towards moving towards new technologies. The kind of climate agora section focused on wildfires and flooding and the disaster risks that are incumbent and the cost of these. As it is, we're looking at 9 of the 10 most expensive natural disasters in US history having hit in the last decade. And that represents hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars just in the US. So I think there's something that, I really, going back to that comment you made at the beginning about just kind of feeling 10 years out of date, there's just a total disconnect on the scale of economic change that climate change is driving, and how that disconnect with oil and gas is felt in that space. I don't know if that was something that, yeah, that ran true to you.
No, what you observed is absolutely correct. And it's, and if we want to blame anyone, we have to blame Wall Street. And we have to blame ourselves. And anyone who owns an S&P 500 index fund in their retirement account is partially to blame for this, because the way oil and gas companies are valued is based on their reserves. How much oil and gas do they have in the ground that they're going to be able to pump for the next 10, 20, 30 years? if you say, or if a CEO stands up and says, if Mike Wirth at Chevron stands up and says, "Oh, by the way, we're gonna stop pumping," or let's say he just says, "We're gonna stop drilling for new reserves," that we think the IEA is correct, that demand for oil is going to begin to dip around 2030. We cannot generate, we cannot produce the cheapest oil. That's Saudi Arabia. So Aramco is always going to generate the cheapest oil. So rather than try to drill for ever more expensive reserves in the deep water of Gulf of Mexico, we're going to give up. We're just not going to drill anymore. And when we sell what we've got, we're done. Well, if Mike Wirth says that, his stock price is going to drop 80% in the next 90 to 180 days,
Yeah.
because that the story behind oil and gas stock is we have a whole bunch of stuff that people are going to pay for the next 20 years, and we're going to generate an 18% to 24% return on capital deployed, which is typical for an oil and gas company. But if Mike Wirth says, "Oh, well, we're going to generate electricity um, from let's say wind and solar, because right now those are the two cheapest ways of generating electricity today." Well, the profit margin on a wind and solar company, a mature wind or solar company, is about 8%, maybe 5.
Mm.
So if you're switching to a new form of energy where the return on capital is a quarter of what it is today, then an investor is going to look at your company and cut the value of your company by 75%.
Yeah.
And that's why none of these people can stand up and tell the truth, is because the minute they do, they crash their stock price. And their board of directors will fire them and bring in someone else who's going to say the right thing. I mean, look at what happened to Bob Dudley at BP. He got fired. Lord Brown at BP also got fired. The new CEO of Shell, Wael Sawan, is not taking the very progressive stands that his predecessor did, because he's not supposed to. It's not what the board wants.
Mm.
Um, the real chameleon here is Patrick Pouyanné from Total Energies, because he somehow has managed to dance on this tight wire between saying, "Oh, I'm moving us toward a clean energy future," while at the same time I'm still drilling for deep water gas off the coast of Brazil.
Mm.
And it's, it's fascinating to watch. But yeah, none of these people are going to be able to do anything until the United States government comes down and puts a hard law that says, "Okay, you're going to have to get out of this oil and gas business." And the closest thing we've seen to that, obviously, is the new EPA rules around um, transportation emissions, small light vehicle emissions, that's pushing Americans to buy EVs and hybrids. And what does the chief lobbyist for big oil do? It immediately announces it's going to sue and fight that regulation tooth and nail to make sure that the federal government does not pass a law that reduces demand for crude oil.
This is so fascinating because I mean, it also reminds me of something that I've heard other people discuss before as well, which is this idea of, is oil and gas listening to car manufacturers? Do they see where other industries related to their work are actually going? Because exactly, demand is both spurred by government action, but also by consumer demand is rapidly changing in a way that, I don't know where on the graph between, kind of national estimates of oil and gas peak production hitting around 2030 versus oil and gas's estimates, which are 10, 15, 20 years down the road from that, exactly where that peak's going to hit. But it does seem pretty likely we're going to peak safely between 2030 and 2040, which would, I mean, I'm not sitting over here saying, "Oh, yay, the crash is coming tomorrow for everyone." But it does seem like some more realistic strategy about that transition would be necessary. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about, yeah, that real fear around stock prices that motivates these people.
Yeah, no, stock prices are on a 90-day cycle, right? I mean, these big annual forecasts that OPEC, BP, Exxon, EIA, all, Greenpeace has one occasionally. Um, you know, you can find an economist to come up with whatever number you want.
Nothing
And
reliable as statistics.
Oh, yeah. And let's not forget that all these EVs are being purchased in wealthy countries. And what happens to our old cars? They get put on ships and they go to South America, they go to Africa, they go to South Asia, where they have second, third, fourth lives. And that's one of the reasons why you hear these folks talk so much about developing countries and demand in Africa and Asia is because they really believe that those countries are going to trail so far behind Western countries in adapting new technologies that, that's going to give them an extra 10 years.
Speaking of 10 years, you've been going to CERAweek for 10 years now, and I'm curious if over that time, have you found any, I mean, you did mention the innovation agora that's around now thinking about climate, but do you see any more engagement in this space? Any real changes over that decade and how the conference talks and functions?
Oh, absolutely. A decade ago, they were still denying that human beings were causing climate change.
Mm.
There was an entire day dedicated to the coal uh, industry, where just like you have all the oil and gas CEOs speaking, they would have all the coal company CEOs speaking and have the leaders of the utilities that operate coal-fired power plants speaking and talking about how climate change is unproven. It's probably geologic if it's happening at all. Um, yeah, I mean, you could not get anyone to talk about decarbonization
Mm.
whatsoever. There was no, all the cops, all the conference of parties, all the UN climate change stuff was considered eccentric um, and you know and fake, frankly. Um, and you don't hear that anymore. At least now, today, everyone's talking about decarbonization. They won't say climate change, but they will say we must decarbonize. Um, and they'll talk about how they fully expect the public to pay them enormous amounts of money to decarbonize and solve the problem that they created. Because that's really the only way they can see that they're going to make money in a low carbon world.
Well, thank you for that. So I guess my last question for you is just, I'm curious about how you left feeling the conference and, any other major takeaways, but also especially your, business columnist at the Houston Chronicle. What are your takeaways for Houston? What should we be thinking about? And what is this week, what has it told you, or what are you looking for in the near term for oil and gas and our economy here in town?
I think there's always a stark difference between what leaders say and do and what actually happens on the ground.
Mm.
I would love to see the CEOs take a greater leadership role in announcing plans to reduce their extraction of oil and gas and come up with alternatives. Um, and to be perfectly honest, if they had come up with one, if Exxon's 20 years of research into algae-based fuels had actually paid off in something, Exxon would be leading the way in
Mm.
phasing out oil and gas. The minute one of these companies figures out a different way to make money, um, they will break the door down and demand that the government ban oil and gas. Um, we just have to get there. I mean, that's exactly what happened with chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone hole back in the 70s and 80s. The United States had the only alternative to CFCs, And so the US industry led the way in getting the world to ban CFCs because they had the patent on the one thing that could replace them. Um, because ultimately, if they can make their shareholders happy, they don't care what they produce. Um, Now, for Houston, though, there is a very large number of really smart people doing innovative things. Um, we see what they call the high velocity hub, and that's high HY velocity, and that's for hydrogen. And they're going to get $1 billion from the federal government to develop a clean hydrogen hub in Houston. And a key aspect of that will be to capture carbon and sequester it in old oil reservoirs. Now, that technology is far from proven and far from perfect, but with $1 billion, you might be able to figure it out. Houston is also home to one of the nation's leading hubs for trade in renewable electricity. Because we generate more wind and solar power than any other state in the country, there's all kinds of electricity trading going on in Houston, and there are more companies coming up with more ideas. Um, and, you know, I also think there's a fundamental generational difference here because I find that when I write about these topics, it's the people over 50 who really don't want to give up on the oil and gas industry because it's all they've ever known and they are completely invested in it. It's where their paycheck comes from, and and they're willing to believe any story that tells them that they're not villains. Um, but at one, actually was at an offshore technology conference about 6 years ago. There was a young people in energy um, event, and the leader of the event it was an old man, of course, and he's standing in front of a room of about 500 young people in it, and asked, "How many of you want to get into a low carbon business?" And he was expecting them to say no, but 90% of the people raised their hands.
Yeah.
And he was like, and he was stunned. He was absolutely stunned and surprised. Um, because he didn't get it. He didn't he's that far behind because like all of us, folks in the oil and gas industry live in a bubble and an echo chamber. And that's why if you were in the room with Amin Nasser when CEO of Aramco, when he said we got to get rid of this fantasy of a low carbon world, people applauded. Because that's the echo chamber they're in. But I don't think it'll last much longer. What's fascinating to me is the huge amounts of money the oil and gas folks spend on the Hilton side of the event. And those rooms are almost always half empty. And then you go over to Agora, where the clean energy and the climate tech stuff is happening, and every event is standing room only.
Yeah.
We the people are going to lead this. It's not going to be the CEOs, and it's not even going to be the politicians. It's going to be the people and the innovators and the young entrepreneurs. They're going to make a difference. And I see more of them every year, and I hear more about their successes every year. So I remain optimistic, even if the idea of going back to an 11th CERAweek kind of makes me queasy on, the day after I just got back from it. So.
No, that's actually a wonderfully hopeful note for us to end on. Chris Tomlinson is business columnist at the Houston Chronicle, where you can read his outstanding coverage of CERAweek alongside myriad other topics, and strongly encourage you to go read his work. Thank you so much for your time, for speaking with us. It's been a pleasure hearing from you.
Thank you, Weston. Thanks for having me on.
In our second story today, we are going to take a departure over to a related energy concern, but this time a new project here in Houston and around the world that is helping us to reimagine what public art looks like and what it can be in terms of climate change by generating actual power. So we'll now go over to talk with Land Art Generator and learn more about their experience in bringing public artwork that can generate electricity to communities around the world. So today I'm joined by Elizabeth Minoyan and Robert Ferry, who are the founding co-directors of Land Art Generator, which is a fantastic project that's coming to Houston, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're so happy to be here.
Absolutely. So just to start off, tell me, what is Land Art Generator? How did this come to fruition? How did you two get started? And just walk me through a little bit of the work that you do.
Sure. Well, in 2008, we got married. Robert's an architect, and I'm an artist and designer. And we decided to move to Dubai and have an adventure. And when we got there in August of 2008, we were exploring the region and came to learn that there was a movement of land artists who were Emirati, inspired by the movement out of the United States. And we, later that fall, we really sat down and got to thinking about what are the pinch points for the energy transition. And there are many, we know, but one of those is the aesthetics of the energy infrastructure. And we thought, okay, if that's a pinch point, then let's address that with our practice.
We were, at the time, the thing that people were saying already was that it's not a technological challenge anymore. We have the technology. It's a problem of political will, and so since around that time. And of course, technology continues to improve. But the challenge seems to be one of social science, one of how do we really inspire mass movement in democratic societies for people to really embrace this. And on the one hand, you have at the time, certainly, this is 2 years after An Inconvenient Truth was launched. There was really a gloom and doom environment about rising sea levels and heat map projections, and it's all true, and the science is scary. But if all we do is focus on the apocalyptic future scenarios, it kind of shuts us down. We become deer in headlights, and we were really trying to figure out, how do we plant a seed of desire in the general public? How can we paint a beautiful, inspiring image of what a world beyond carbon looks like that is one of human thriving, beauty, creativity, and wonder? And so that was really what we tried to put out there to the world to respond to.
So that's the point of inspiration that led us to develop an international open call design competition.
Okay.
And we framed that first competition for 3 sites in the United Arab Emirates, 1 in Dubai and 2 in Abu Dhabi. And that competition was open from January until April or May. I don't recall right now. But when the competition closed, the submissions came into our inbox. We had 150 waiting for us when we woke up the next morning. And we were in awe of the incredible talent around the world and how people really rose to the occasion. This was something that designers around the world understood and they responded to beautifully.
And so for folks who don't know, you said you had an international design competition, and I think we've established, this grew out of land art, this kind of, movement in the 70s on, in the U.S., an artistic movement and aesthetic style, really thinking about what we do with land. But then, it sounds very much like, well, what does land art have to do with, how we're thinking about the climate transition? I've heard you say the aesthetics, and I totally buy this is a bigger problem. But yeah, what is the tangible connection here?
That's right. So the design brief asked for interdisciplinary teams, artists, architects, landscape architects, working alongside engineers to reimagine our energy landscapes as places of wonder, as public art, as public amenities. So the gist of it is, what does a large-scale public artwork look like if it utilizes renewable energy technology as the core media for the artwork?
Yeah, and when I've heard you speak about this before and some of that inspiration, you also pointed to examples of existing energy infrastructure, as you mentioned. And yeah, I don't know if you want to walk us through a little about how that thought process went of what else could our energy infrastructure look like?
Yeah, it's really helpful to look back to history because there's a strong connection between energy and human culture, energy infrastructure and human culture. Our power plants at the beginning of electrification at the end of the 19th century were designed by architects to be beautiful contributions to the urban fabric because they had to be located right in the hearts of where energy was consumed in our city centers, because we couldn't raise the voltage high enough to transmit electricity efficiently at that time. So every city has an old power plant, and they've been converted into places like the Tate Modern in London, for example.
Beautiful
These are
museum.
and the Battersea just down the Thames. These are beautiful, cherished structures because they were designed to be artworks in space, really. And once we were able to raise that voltage and transmit that electricity, we moved those polluting power plants out of our cities because no one really wants to live next to one of those. But a consequence of that is that these infrastructures lost their relationship to art, design, and human culture. And today, very few of us can tell you where the electricity comes from behind the switch on the wall. So one of the goals for the Land Art Generator is to heal that connection, bring that back, introduce people to their energy infrastructure with these really beautiful bespoke projects that rise to the level of public art that can be placemaking tools where people would want to come and spend time and learn about the technologies.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have seen many of these entries that have come in, and I encourage folks to check out your website, landartgenerator.org, and look through themselves because they are really spectacular. There are just some incredible things people have sent in. I don't know if you want to share any of your favorites or ones that particularly stand out to you, and try to give listeners a little sense of, I think it's one thing to understand, all right, okay, so there's a power generator and it's aesthetic in some way, but I think, describing some of these really amazing projects that people have suggested might help to broaden what we're thinking of here.
Yeah, so we'll get to the photovoltaic examples because that's the most versatile technology as a media.
So we're talking about solar panels here.
Solar panels.
Yes. All right, there we go. All right,
Yeah,
sorry.
I should have just said solar panels.
That's okay.
But, when you close your eyes and you think of a solar panel, you'll often have that blue solar cells on a white backer board rectangle in mind. And those are great. We love those. Those are great for utilitarian installations. But the truth is that over the last couple of decades, there are a lot of advances in building integrated photovoltaics, BIPV, that has led this. And you can get a solar panel that looks like anything. It could be pure red, white, blue. It could have graphics on it. It could be all sorts of amazing textures.
Are you saying that I could put like a solar panel Mickey Mouse in my
Yes.
front yard as lawn art?
You
There's
could.
there's
Oh
actually
my
Yes.
heavens.
yeah, absolutely. You could do anything with these. So they're extremely versatile, and I'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. And the one that we're working on in Houston actually is incorporating that technology. But before we get there, there are a number of other renewable energy technologies that are also very interesting. One that I'd like to talk about first is using concentrated solar power thermal technology, CSP. So this uses directly the heat energy of the sun to generate electricity. And you might be familiar with the solar power towers in the deserts of Nevada and California. These use heliostat mirrors that track the sun across the sky and focus its energy onto a central collector that's usually full of a kind of salt that melts, and that molten salt, you can run a heat transfer fluid to flash to steam to power a turbine.
Wow.
Almost all of our electricity is powered by heat energy running turbines, and you can create that heat however you want. You can burn coal, gas, you could have nuclear fission, or you can just take it directly from the sun. And so these are really exciting. And one of the projects, the Solar Hourglass, is the winner of the 2014 Logi competition for Copenhagen. And it is designed by Santiago Muris Cortez to be reminiscent of an hourglass. And instead of sand or crushed eggshells falling from one bulb to the other to keep time, it's a beam of light that is created by heliostat mirrors in the top bulb of the hourglass, focusing the sun's energy onto a parabolic mirror that creates a vertical beam of light that falls, quote unquote, to the bottom bulb of the hourglass, where that balance of systems, that collector and this turbine are located safely. People can walk on the roof of that lower bulb of the hourglass, and they can touch that beam of light. It's protected with thermal insulated glass so they don't burn themselves, but it still will be warm to the touch, and they can know that just a few inches behind their hand is that beam of light, the power of 1,000 suns. And all of that heat energy is going to that turbine, which actually is powerful enough to power 1,000 homes.
Wow.
And it, from a distance across the water, it's just this beacon of light. That is an hourglass reminding us all that there's still time to avert the very worst effects of climate change if we all act collectively together. So again, a very inspiring, positive message to counteract some of the gloom and doom and climate despair, and show really right there that you can power 1,000 homes with a beautiful work of art that creates a shaded, beautiful place for people. Projects use all sorts of technologies. Some of them make it rain inside just from the power of the sun.
Wow.
Some create drinking water. It's just all sorts of amazing things.
Well, and I love that. I've seen some that you've shown me, but also that I've looked through, and I mean, really thinking about, how do people engage with. I've seen some where almost like fields that become, these spaces that create shade and create opportunity for people to move through, and like parks that we really rethink what our public space looks like in ways that are just so exciting, which prompts me to ask, I think when you started this program, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea was these didn't have to be realizable. They were a little bit of an element of fantasy. But those have gotten far more tangible as time's gone on.
That's right. We founded the project thinking that it would be an ideas competition. It was an experiment. Nothing like this existed. So we didn't really know how it would play out. However, we did ask in the design brief that they be constructible and realizable. So it was always our intention to someday build them. Now, we always get a few ideas in a competition that are far out and wild and unicorns, and those are great. However, we mostly get designs that really are constructible and doable, and there are engineering minds behind these. So while we did start out as an ideas competition, we now run competitions towards construction. So we're in a whole new phase of our organization because these teams came to the table over the years and proved the idea as feasible.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's what I wanted to move to next is, can you walk us through some of these projects that are becoming realized? Maybe best to start with here in Houston.
Let's do it. We are under development with a project called Arch of Time. It was originally a submission to our 2019 competition, which actually was a return to Abu Dhabi. So we've been around the world with these competitions, but in 2019, we were invited back. And the project being built here was one of many that had been presented to the city of Houston and a range of stakeholders. And it's the project that rose to the top and was selected for construction.
The artwork is designed by Riccardo Mariano. He's an artist and architect, Italian, but lives in Berlin. And the artwork it's no wonder it was selected. It's just incredibly beautiful. And it is a solar timekeeping device. So every hour, over 11 hours, it's an arch in its form. And in the top of the arch are 11 apertures, and they are aligned perfectly with the solar path of the city of Houston. So it's unique. It's like a fingerprint of the city, the geometry of the work. Every hour, on the solar hour, a beam of light as performance is cast by the sun onto the ground plane underneath the arch, surrounded by about 25,000 square feet of shade. So it creates a high contrast, and the shade is wonderful for Houstonians, of course. And visitors to the artwork can watch that beam of light move slowly across the ground plane, feel the Earth spinning, and understand their place in the cosmos. So the artwork is a wonderful connection between the terrestrial and the celestial. And more than that, the top surface of the arch is clad in a most beautiful dark solar module, custom made. It won't at first glance look like a solar panel. You'd pretty much have to know that that's what it is. But it's such a beautiful design and a large area so that has a capacity of 350 kilowatts, which is just a number, I know, but over an average year, it will generate about 400,000 kilowatt hours of electricity.
Okay.
And to put that into perspective, that would power completely 40 Texan homes. And Texan homes are above average in energy consumption, but we like to just shorthand it and say that it would power a neighborhood. So a really nice sized city block.
I'm curious about other projects that are maybe coming online or that you're in development on, if there are other ones we should be looking out for, either certainly I think folks would love more in Houston, but, globally, where else might we see some of these projects in the near future?
Well, we've done so much work in Texas. We've been creating solar mural artworks in San Antonio.
Oh, wow.
And back to your question about Mickey Mouse, where the answer was yes. Solar mural artworks are an opportunity to, like any mural that is narrative and local storytelling, it allows an opportunity to place an artwork on top of a solar panel.
And you might need to talk to Disney to get the license before you do the mouse on your panel. But yeah, the one of the projects that comes to mind was a collaboration with a fifth grade class, Mr. Vargas's fifth grade class at JT Brackenridge. And these students collaborated with elders in their community to create an 18-module solar mural installation on the side of their school that helps power the school. And it will be up making energy for 30 years or so, and they'll be able to show their kids the artwork that they helped to design. And so that is a really wonderful example of how communities can co-design their own energy infrastructure. And not to say that every energy infrastructure needs to be a work of art, but when you have the opportunity to do that, it helps to advance the overall movement because people replace that image in their mind of a solar panel as being ugly with one that's beautiful.
I love that. I'm curious about in these community collaborations that you've had, what are some of the things that you've learned or seen? If there are stories that you want to share just about how this helps people to reimagine and re-understand, their relationship to energy certainly, but also how they're thinking about climate more broadly and the role of art in this movement and the role of art in thinking around environmental challenges.
Every project really different in terms of the consortium of community. A really lovely example, though, that I would like to share is we did a summer camp in Pittsburgh where we worked with a group of young people age 8 to 17 over the course of maybe 6 weeks. 6-week camp. And over that time, we took those kids to a coal-fired plant. We took them to a nuclear plant. We took them to installations that were sustainable. We wanted them to understand the energy mix of Western Pennsylvania. Then we gave them lessons in energy science, energy democracy, art outside of the gallery, systems thinking, engineering process. You get the idea. It was a very robust 6 weeks. And during that time, the young people conceptualized, designed, and helped to build a solar sculpture that is still up today, feeding into a community center. And one of the loveliest moments of that camp for me, there are two. One is when we were out on site on a build day, community members coming over to the young people and asking what it was they were doing and listening to these kids describe the process and the project to the community. And that felt really like a legacy project when the young people themselves are talking to the community about all of the lessons that they had learned over those few weeks.
And there's another thing to look back on in history is the era of the last time we invested so much money into our energy infrastructure, the Works Progress Administration in the 30s. At that time, the federal art program brought 10,000 artists, many of whom helped to gild that infrastructure. And so we have places today like the Hoover Dam where people go from Las Vegas to see these beautiful Art Deco sculptures. against that desert landscape, they don't necessarily go there because they're geeks about hydroelectricity, but while they're there, they'll learn about it. And I think that we have the same opportunity today with this great energy transition to create those kind of places for future generations to look back at this very important time in history when we pulled back from the brink. Another memory from our art energy camp is one of the first days we were there. One of the participants told us they wanted us to know how much they knew about climate change, and they said, "I heard the planet is dying because of the climate." So that really set the stage for us because we can't really, this is a lot we're giving the next generation in terms of a burden, a psychological burden even. And so I think that through that 6 weeks, hopefully we helped that young woman understand that she has agency. And we need to make sure that the energy transition is something that we're all a part of. That it's not something that's being done to people, because if that's the case, it's going to take longer. We need everybody on this team. We need to inspire people to become an active participant in the transition, and that way we can really accelerate it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the WPA, and I'm having flashbacks now actually to energy infrastructure that Thomas Hart Benton, the great social realist painter from the kind of 30s and 40s, beautiful, beautiful giant murals of the West that I adore and I've been to museums before to see his work, did a whole series of these inside of energy infrastructure buildings and kind of headquarters for stations. And it's not something I've thought about in a minute. And it's really lovely to think about that. Particularly, we had a conversation regarding labor and this idea that the Green New Deal came up in that conversation, and certainly that notion of carrying over that New Deal mentality. And this is something that I hear from the art world quite a lot, is that notion of, we have put artists to work before, we have seen them as part of the solution before, and that thinking about that transition actually really requires that artistic component and thinking about, what these jobs can look like, which brings to that idea of, I think just the imaginative capacity of this work. We, as you're saying, kids who are scared, right? And rightfully so, about what their future is going to look like. Heck, people like me who are not kids anymore who are scared about what their future is going to look like. Things that allow us to shift away from always the worries about what we're losing or what's lost, and we are going to continue on. We are going to have a world. We are going to live in it. And there are many ways of doing that. And actually the future can be a beautiful thing. And adaptive strategies can actually be really incredible. And the idea that our energy infrastructure could actually be beautiful and sites for engagement and for play and frivolity is really fascinating, because that's just so outside how I've ever thought of energy, and I think how most people encounter it and think about it. Well, I think there's something really exciting to the point that you were making about, the idea of public art, enhancing our public spaces, right, and our parks in particular. And I look at Arch of Time, and some of the mock-up images you have a piano sitting in the middle, and this idea that, yes, it's a beautiful structure that looks like a large public artwork, as many people would think of what that, various things might imagine, but also can be a concert venue, can also be a space for performance, can also be a spot of shade when you're walking through a hot park. I think that idea that this can actually serve multiple purposes and it can generate energy just really shows what the possibilities of this are, and really expand what our imaginary is capable of in this space in an exciting way.
And expand what public art can be.
Yeah.
We like to think of the definition of regenerative art as an artwork that over time, over its life cycle, gives generously some sort of service to the community. In this case, it's free electricity that offsets the embodied carbon in the materials of the artwork. So the Arch of Time is going to have a concrete foundation. It's going to have structural steel. All of these things, because we live in the world we live in, will have embodied carbon in them. In their creation, they'll take carbon to make. But we've estimated that around year 7 from the clean electricity generated by the artwork, it will have paid off its embodied carbon footprint and then become net positive for the planet that the artwork exists. So we would love to see a lot of art being made in that vein. The lower the upfront footprint, the quicker the payback. But most of the projects in the Land Art Generator portfolio can be called regenerative artworks.
That's really exciting, and I think connects to so many other environmental conversations in ways that I really love thinking about what that possibility is.
Well, I would like to mention that we are putting together an educational committee right now for the Arch of Time. We want to develop a suite of materials that include printed educational materials for various ages, digital materials, an app, figure out what sort of on-site programming can exist for students of all ages. So we are putting together that committee right now. And if any of your listeners have brilliant ideas of who might be on that committee, please reach out to us.
Absolutely.
And as a part of the fundraising, the capital campaign for the project, we are going to be hopefully creating a constellation of energy artworks around Houston through our solar mural program. So we hope to be able to see that to fruition as well, so that the Arch of Time will stand as an artwork in the center of this constellation, but that we can bring beautiful solar to schools and libraries and community centers around the city.
Oh, wonderful. Is this envisioned as more of these kind of community-engaged projects?
That's exactly right.
Excellent.
Exactly.
That's really exciting.
That's the vision.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for sharing this project with us. And it's really wonderful to learn more about your work. And I hope to see it live in Houston very soon.
Thank you. We can't wait.
Thanks.
Lastly, we're going to go to our researcher, Sienna, who has an update on how to get involved around town this week.
Looking to get involved in your community while enjoying the outdoors and making a difference? Look no further than Blodgett Urban Gardens. Every Saturday from 9 a.m. till 12 p.m., they invite you to join them at their garden located at 3216 Blodgett Street. No gardening experience required. Whether you're a seasoned green thumb or complete newbie, your assistance is invaluable to them. Just bring your reusable water bottle, wear closed-toed shoes, headgear, and sunscreen, and they'll provide all the necessary tools and guidance to make this a fun and rewarding experience for you. And it's also family-friendly and wheelchair accessible. Blodgett Urban Gardens is proud to be a community garden in the 3rd Ward that harvests not only fresh fruits and veggies, but also smiles. Every week, they come together to garden, buy locally grown produce, learn about sustainable gardening techniques, and volunteer with their team. As a nonprofit organization, they're dedicated to sustainable gardening, healthy eating, and community education. Their mission is to expand sustainable food options in their community and other urban communities in the surrounding area. Ready to get started? Sign up on Volunteer Houston's website. Simply look for Blodgett Urban Gardens. For more information, you can also email them at info@blodgetturbangardens.com. Again, that's info@blodgetturbangardens.com. They can't wait to see you there.
Up next time on Gulf Streams, we're talking about urban agriculture that's popping up in unexpected places, old office buildings. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081. That's 713-348-4081. Or email me at westont@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Co-produced by Joseph Campana. Audio engineer Rico Enriquez. Research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce and Sienna Yen. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.